Well, welcome to season 5. This is episode 196 of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm with my co-host, Punya Mishra from Arizona State University out west. I'm with Dr. Chris Dede from Harvard in the east. And I'm Curt Bonk in Indiana in the Midwest. So we've got the country sort of covered today. We're going to talk about what's happening in the news, what's happened in the past episodes, what's going to happen in the future. We're coming near episode 200. We're going to have a special show for episode 200 and a special show for episode 201 to get us in the next 100 shows. And we do have a website that has every single show in it. So do check us out at silverliningforlearning.org and take a look at our previous shows in YouTube, as well as various podcast formats. If you'd like to know more about how to access our shows, contact Punya Mishra, and he will tell you all the formats that it's in case you want to use it in your classes next fall or next spring, or just listen on the trails this summer or at home on your back deck, because that's why we have these shows every week just for you. Get your professional development online. That's serious now, because on March 21st of 2020, we said, let's create a podcast show because people are sitting around at home during COVID. And you can get some professional development every week for a few weeks, maybe a few months. But here we are in season 5, no less. We've got a couple of really interesting episodes coming up, but we don't spoil it yet. We'll wait to the end of the show to tell you what's coming next. Chris, is there anything that's on your radar that you want to bring out today and have us chat about this afternoon?
Before Chris starts, I have firstly, what an awesome introduction, Curt. You should be professional podcast host. That's I think a second career waiting for you there. I'm just curious how you got this, that we are season 5, because we have, usually these series have a season of 10, 15, 13 episodes, and then they shut down for a while, then they come back. You seem to have magically created this. We are on season 5. I'm just curious where that number came from.
After we turned over March 21st, we're on into June. We are in the 5th year of the show. Every day on the trail, I am listening to a podcast show called Adapted Podcast. It's about Korean adoptees being interviewed. My son's a Korean adoptee. And so I'm in episode 5 of that show right now. In fact, I've listened to about 50 episodes. So that's how I got that. And you want to, Chris, I'm sorry, Punya, you want to give us your email address for just verbally for people who are listening now and might want to contact you and get more info on downloads.
Sure. So first of all, just go to silverliningforlearning.org. That's really the best place to go to. All the information on the podcast, videos, blah, blah, blah is all there. But my email address is very simple. It's just my first name, Punya, Punya @asu.edu. That's it. First name @asu.edu. Very simple. All right, Chris, on to you.
And he's a great keynote speaker if you need one. Both of these guys are. So, if you're looking, contact Chris, contact Punya. Chris.
Well, Curt, that was an awesome intro. And I kept waiting for you to say, but wait, there's more. If you order in the next half hour, we'll double our offer. So, you could add to this by watching some of the infomercials that are bombarding us on television. So I want to begin by talking about a phenomenon that's taken place in the field of ed tech that I think is unfortunate. And that is that AI has taken all the air out of the room, and that nobody is talking about anything else in ed tech except a million articles on AI, where every day there's 3 new frameworks for making decisions, and there's 4 new guidelines for doing prompt engineering. People obviously aren't reading what's being produced because they're just duplicating again and again and again what's being produced. And the rest of the field, and we are a show that does cover the rest of the field, there's interesting stuff happening. Silver Lining is named after the fact that online education was given a big boost by the pandemic. there's a lot of interesting things happening now in online education, including the fact that the rich data streams out of online education are needed for these AI models if they're going to personalize learning. There's a lot that has happened with immersive learning. I did a keynote for the iLearn conference a couple weeks ago and talked about the fact that a problem in immersive learning has been that people like Mark Zuckerberg think, oh, people are going to be in a virtual environment all the time. That's going to be the new reality. Well, that's not going anywhere. You're not going to be in VR all the time. You're not even going to be in a through the monitor environment all the time. But if we imagine an ecosystem with many niches, some of those niches are immersive. And thinking about what niches are immersive and what aren't, and how we design for those immersive niches, that's an interesting topic. So I'm just sort of dismayed by the fact that if the title doesn't have AI in it, it's not even publishable now. And that all of the AI things seem to be me too, as opposed to, I looked at this framework you've got, I think it has some strengths, I think it has some weaknesses, let's work on how we could make it better. Nothing like that. So a difficult time to find some oxygen to talk about the field as a whole.
And Chris is saying that as someone who has $20 million grant on AI. So he has some authenticity into the statements that he's making. And this has been an issue, Chris, that the field has been facing forever, really, in that people seek out the next great thing. And those of us in the trenches doing work, making little inroads here and there, incremental findings, and trying to add them up into something substantive and in depth, all of a sudden you see the whole field paying attention to something else when you've been, whether you're working on immersive learning or digital textbooks or open educational resources or micro-credentialing, which is still perhaps, if we had to pick a second area, it'd be that area where people are paying attention today or focusing their energies anyhow on alternative degree programs and micro-credentials and so forth to help the adult student out there. In a couple of weeks, we'll have people from University of Illinois Springfield talking about how to deal with the changing needs of the adult learner. So this will come back out, I hope, and maybe we can have some episodes on the adult learner. In fact, we had talked about that earlier. But you're right, we jump, and it's got to be sort of a time for young people in the field to feel sort of schizophrenic, to figure out where they're going to put their tent in the ground or make a stake in the ground and pursue it. Or do they just jump to this or that along the way and never make sense of their career or of what they've contributed within their career, right? And so that has become difficult, more difficult than it's ever been, but it's always been difficult. It's always been an issue for our field. It's great to get the attention that we've gotten. It's great to have people looking to us for some answers and solutions, which has really happened since March 21st of 2020 when we started. But unfortunately, people were using a emergency remote instruction instead of the vast reservoir of research findings in online and distance learning that have accumulated really for decades, if not centuries, and thinking about this is the new thing, and it's not all that new. The other thing I want to point out, Chris, and I see Punya wants to jump in here, the iLearn conference, I keynoted in Coimbra, Portugal 7 years ago, so I hoped I warmed them up for you, Chris. Punya.
So I was just building on Chris, what you said about this, like the sucking out of oxygen because of this AI thing. First of all, it's kind of interesting to go back in history and look where the term AI came from, which is this conference in Dartmouth back in 1950s. And the only reason they chose the phrase AI is because they didn't want to use the phrase, which the term that they had originally wanted to use was cybernetics. Because Robert Wiener had sort of taken over that term and they didn't want to have a turf war with him. I so wish that we had stuck with cybernetics rather than artificial intelligence, because the connotations that come with that word intelligence get our brains all messed up. While if you'd have said cybernetics, then we could have actually had a reasoned discussion about which aspects of this are quote unquote human-like, in the sense of that it can engage in a dialogue and what it can do and what it cannot do. And it would always keep the information processing piece at the center of it, rather than the intelligence piece, which I think gets us off into all kinds of weird intellectual boondoggles, which we don't really need to get into. So that was, I think, one point, I think, historically, that turning point, where we choose what we want to call this thing, made, I think, a huge difference. The second thing is that I was looking up on my website as you were speaking, Chris, and I found this piece dated August 20, 2014, so almost exactly 10 years ago, where I had written a blog post in response to an Atlantic article, the title of which was "Why Tech Still Hasn't Solved Education's Problems." And guess which technology that they were talking about, which had been hyped up the kazoo and then found to be not, going to solve fundamental problems of education? Well, it is the massively open online course. Now, MOOCs, as Curt in particular, I mean, in our group here, has done research to show, and we've had students from Nepal and others who have used MOOCs in ways that are genuinely transformative in their learning, in their education, in their lives. However, to take that thing and put it on a pedestal and say, this is going to solve all of education problems, I think is hugely, hugely problematic. And I think we are seeing the same thing with AI as well. I mean, Khanmigo is a product. And, there is this whole thing of the 2 sigma effect that Bloom had found, which actually, if you dig into, turns out to be not as powerful, blah, blah, blah. But that's sort of the received wisdom. If you had a good one-on-one tutor, you are going to get the 2 sigma effect, and it is going to solve every one of education problems. It doesn't get at the question of the fact that students are disengaged with school, disengaged with the subject matter, the processes that we use. Putting a tutor, human or otherwise, doesn't solve certain other critical problems of education. So anyway, I'm speaking to the converted, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of these points, I think, just to emphasize, Chris, what you had said, which is that this term AI has sucked the oxygen out, partly because of the term itself, which I think historically could have been a different term. And second, is this the title of my blog post is "The Recurring Cycle of Hype and Despair Around EdTech." And I think what we are seeing here is an overhyping of AI, which will then inevitably lead to a backlash, and we will not even acknowledge some of the things that it actually can do properly and actually can be useful, and others where it does not, it doesn't work there. Anyway, I'll stop and get your responses.
Chris, before you jump in here, just want to mention to our audience that if you're interested in reading about that 1950s and what was going on, in fact, back to the 1800s with Charles Babbage and Leda Lovelace, John Markoff wrote a great book called Machines of Loving Grace back in 2015. It's available from Echo Press. I did a book review. If you just write to me at cjbonk@iu.edu, I'll send you my book review. Don't have to read the book. No, do get the book. It's summertime. Do get it, listen to it, read it, whatever, talk about it. These historical texts that you can find today are very informative, because we are moving at such a fast pace that it's wonderful to go back and reflect on where we've come from, what has led to this. I found that book totally fascinating, and many of the characters in it are still making inroads in the field of technology and educational technology in particular. So it's not just a historical book, it's something that's relevant today, even though it came out 9 years ago. And I'll just read what the book overview is. As robots are increasingly integrated in modern society, on the battlefield and the road in business, education, health, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times author John Markoff searches for an answer to one of the most important questions of our age. Will machines help us, or will they replace us? In the past decade alone, Google's introduced us to driverless cars. Apple's debuted its personal assistant we keep in our pockets, and the review goes on. Chris.
So obviously, I do believe that there is a genuine gain in this latest cycle of AI. As you point out, I'm a part of an AI institute that has $20 million in 5 years.
A wee little bit of money, just a little bit. Sorry.
The signal is overwhelmed by the noise in terms of AI. And a lot of it is the fault of people who are trying to make a buck. So I'll probably be banned from buying any ed tech product again when I'm finished with this. But I think it's reprehensible that these companies are putting out minimally viable products, MVP, which at this point seems to mean in the first 5 minutes they probably won't crash, and making all these claims about them, and then they'll see whether the claims are true or not by people buying them and trying them out, and if they're not true, they'll say, "Whoops." But now we have version 2.0, our new minimally viable product with a new set of claims that you can try. You will remember Google Glasses, as an example of an MVP that had all kinds of claims made for it, eventually just disappeared from the face of the earth. Now you've got major companies saying, well, our large language model can sense human emotions. I would love to see hard evidence of that, but people are going to rush out and try it. Khan, Sal Khan, Khanmigo, his proof is to do a thing with his son, and it's staged. It's not a genuine thing with his son. It's a little act that he and his son put together. Why are people buying into stuff like this? I mean, I understand that there have always been hucksters and there are always going to be hucksters, and that P.T. Barnum seems to be alive and well in a lot of the ed tech companies now. But, buyer beware. Why are people falling into these very lightly concealed traps? So there should be somebody saying, like the Chamber of Commerce does, this business is behaving in an inappropriate manner, and we want to label it as such, instead of, let me see if I can release an even less viable product and still claim it's an MVP, and let me see if I can make an even more outlandish claim about it than your product to see if I can get people to buy it.
I think, Chris, I would go a little further than even that, and I would say that, when I look at, there's a lot of discussion in the education space about the ethics of using AI and so on and so forth, right? However, what bothers me is that let's say if I have to write an article where I interview you, I have to go through IRB, to make sure that I do no harm to you and to anybody else. What we have is a global social experiment that is being conducted in a world that we know is already driven by polarization, income inequality, racism, xenophobia, what have you. Throwing these tools out there which can allow you to, I was shocked to learn the other day that almost like 20% of the traffic on ChatGPT on GPT 4.0 is through character AI, which is this website where you can create personas that you can have relationships with and so on. What that means for the social emotional development of teens and so on, when we have already had the social media debacle, what it means for in a world where, I don't know, the right number, if I have the right number in mind, but 70% of the world is going through elections. We saw the use of synthetic media in the Indian elections pretty significantly, which just got over. And so these companies are working with a sense of impunity where they can just, with the idea of getting market share or the hype around it, to release these products, forget the edtech space. I'm talking bigger than that. And I recently wrote this blog post called The Absurd One-Sidedness of the Ethics of AI Debate. Like, where at one level, educators are thinking really hard about what are the ethics of this? What does it mean? What does it mean to engage with text? What does it mean to write? We are thinking about this stuff while these companies just don't care. They just throw the stuff out there. Google recently came up with this thing which was talking about how astronauts eat rocks or whatever, right? Just not trying to build even basic guardrails into the system. I mean, so I just find that completely mind-boggling, the sense of irresponsibility at that scale. So it's not just in edtech. I think it's a bigger concern that I have than just the edtech space. And it's definitely happening in the edtech space, for sure, for sure.
Historically speaking, this is not new. Historically speaking, this has happened before. I wrote a piece in 2016 reflecting on the conference scene back in 2000, and the online learning conferences in Telecon East, Telecon West. I was attending many of these as a keynote and just as finding out what's going on. And you'd go walking around the exhibits, and if you didn't have the name SMART, collaborative, knowledge in the name of your company, you were nothing. And all they were talking about is burn rate, and how much money they could plow through. Here in Bloomington, we had UNext, Cardian University, with Michael Milken's money and Larry what's his name, Larry Orson from Cisco, there, and the junk bond guy. We had all the millions and millions of dollars. It was right before 9/11 that was happening. They were burning through. And I wrote about this, and what was happening, it was weird. As I was walking, this is the heyday of the dot-com bubble, and everyone's handing out T-shirts, coffee mugs, tote bags, but every hour there's a free laptop to give it away. And I was talking to one guy, his name is Bob Cole, and he says, Curt, it's just a lot of trinkets, toys, and trash that they're handing out. My wife tells me to quit bringing it home. And so it was, I wrote. I watched the vendors in booth after booth trying to bring the people in to see what they had. There are magicians doing card tricks, flame eaters, jugglers, men on stilts, of course, a cadre of pretty women in the booths. Not content with the potential business of such trickery would draw, they were giving laptops away every hour or so. I vividly remember the guy on stilts coming into the men's room. I wonder how he would complete his mission. Some things like that. So there's burn, baby, burn. This is, again, 24 years ago. And if you want to read the whole article that I wrote, that piece was cut from an article that I published. I don't know why they cut that part out, because it's probably the most relevant part that I had written, actually, but something had to go. Anyways, again, AI's put it on steroids, all this, there's a 3 times, 4 times, 10 times as much money and attention being given to AI in education as was giving just the dawn of online learning back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But there it was in the dot-com bubble, and it burst. The bubble burst, and so what's going to happen? We have another burst of a bubble here in a couple of years, and what's going to come out on the other side when that happens? What will emerge from that reckoning to really make an impact in education? So when we do have another, not economic cliff, but when we do have another pandemic, what's AI's role in helping us in that interesting world that we were living in 4 years ago and still are in some ways? Chris, you're going to add to that?
Well, I agree with both of you, and taking it in a slightly different direction. We're not fooled, right? I mean, we've been around a long time. We have appropriate professional cynicism. We look at this stuff and we're not fooled. And there's a lot of people probably who have less experience than we do, but still have been, it isn't their first rodeo, and they're not fooled either. But I think the 2 groups that are really damaged by all this hucksterism and false promises. One of them is the teachers in the trenches who are wary of ed tech because most of the technology that they've seen used has been misused, and because they see in generation after generation of magic that's promised that doesn't happen, and nobody is paying attention to what their not only their needs are, but their good diagnosis of what's really needed in the classroom to deal with students who are profoundly demotivated and who are also struggling with a lot of social emotional issues, as our episode a couple weeks ago about Chilean classrooms documented. And there, you know, then you have people like Sal Khan selling something where A, I don't believe it works, B, it's way overhyped, and C, the money that's spent on it is going to come out of teachers. Because there isn't any. You know, most of the education budget is teachers. So teachers are looking at this and they're thinking, well, I'll be out of a job in a few years, and there'll be a paraprofessional that's kind of managing all the kids doing these apps, the math app from Khan and the writing app from so-and-so, and, you know, the reading app from somebody else. They've got to be feeling terrible about all this stuff. And the kids, you know, if you're having mental health problems, throwing an AI companion into the mix is not going to have a happy ending. And yet again, you know, it's all about glitz. It's all about how cute something is, and it's discouraging. It's discouraging because there's not an outcry within the field at large. You've got people like us that are making trouble about it, but there's not an outcry within the field at large. The field at large is buying into it.
So this past week, I was actually in Washington, D.C. For just a couple of days, and I'd been invited by the Learning Policy Institute, and they were doing a convening around transforming school systems through whole child. So the emphasis was on the whole child. And so I was part of a panel, and it was a great, you know, it was good for me to be there to just learn from policy, because that's not a group that I tend to hang out with, policymakers and how they think. So that was revealing. But the discussion that we really had was, Chris, just building on something you sort of mentioned along the way, which is that as we put these sort of bots in these spaces, the kinds of developmental sensitivity that we need to have, and what that means, especially when we know how social media has had a really negative impact, both on sort of the body politic as well as the psychosocial development of teenagers, particularly girls, particularly minorities, what it means to live in a world where we are going to have these kinds of bots available for these frictionless engagements, which is, you know, friction in social interaction is a critical part of growing up, you know, recognizing that. And that I think is going to be really difficult. So that was sort of a good session to sort of dive into that and worry and sort of think about how we can start thinking not of the classroom of today, but the classroom of 5-7 years from now, as to how that will be transformed because of changes in the world around us, and how it can impact the development and growth of learners and youth and young people. So just, you know, it was a good session. It's fun. So I think there is some attention being paid, but not necessarily to the extent that I think, Chris, we think it deserves. I would agree with that.
I'm just going to say that I made a video. I made a PowerPoint with and attached it to the Queen song Bohemian Rhapsody, and I took pictures of all these people in the booths back in the Online Learning 2000 conference in Denver and all the other conferences I was going to in the day. And I had it at the beginning or end of my keynote, and they played the Bohemian Rhapsody song, and I remade it to "There's no learning in e-learning." Easy come, easy go. Will you let me go? Be still now. We will not let him go. And people not let you go out of the booths at the time. Once you're committed to going to the booths for 5 seconds, you're stuck there for 30 minutes, and they had nothing to sell you. They couldn't, their company is called Smart Learning, or they're called Smart Knowledge, or eMind Collaboration, or anything is smart whatever collaborative. They couldn't define what smart is, what learning is, what collaboration is when you went and talked to them. So that was kind of interesting back in the day, So I put it in the chat window, the second blog post I did. I've got the first one I'll put up in a little bit. But yeah, this is we're coming back to this. All these people were probably unemployed for 20 years, and they hired them to come work at their new AI companies, And back in the day, in 2000, they could make up whatever title they want, and that's the title that they had, So that was also kind of interesting. Anyhow, I've been cleaning my office for the past week at home here, and I'm cleaning out, and what do I find? All these AI articles. Will AI shake up the higher ed industry? Are colleges ready? Text to video, AI could change how we think. Are we asking the wrong questions about ChatGPT? The Atlantic's doom and gloom coverage of AI in education. The world's AI first AI-powered courses completely taught by AI teachers. And must we teach AI literacy? But it's not those articles that I want to bring up. I want to bring up a different article that I've been reading here this morning. Professors ask, are we just grading robots? And I'm just going to read a few quotes from this. They interviewed various professors at different universities across the US. One of them says, I've been teaching at the university for 17 years, and suddenly this comes along to devalue everything I've done to become a caring, competent teacher. And the students are creating make work for me, describing the shift as devastating. I'm grading fake papers instead of playing with my own kids. Another one says, now we have to start thinking about more than just assessments in AI. We have to start thinking about learning itself. Go figure, we have to think about learning. Okay. Right. So AI tools can now listen to, summarize a lecture, as well as read and summarize long articles. Another one says, he gives examples from his first year writing course where he tested out the reading assistant last spring. He liked the idea and how the tool could help his students with disabilities that were hidden from him, or those who struggle with English. I thought at the time this would be great. But what scares me is everyone else in the class said, this is amazing. I no longer have to read anything ever again, because this can turn my class into a digital document on Cliff Notes on demand. I don't have to think about that anything anymore. Then he says, he finally got them to think and says, well, I'm going to grade your papers using AI. And the kids said to him, you'll be fired for that. He says, no, I'm not. There's no rules on whether to be fired for that right now, just like there's no rules for you. So this article goes on and on. I recommend it. It's in the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's written by Beth McMurtry. It came out this week. Another one says, the tone I'm starting to see from people is beyond frustration. Anguish is the word I use the most, says Derek Nelson, a history professor at Everett Community College in Washington. Two more I'll read. Another one says that nearly all the students find it helpful and accurate. I still feel guilty about using AI, but it works. And finally, it's going to force everybody to the lowest common denominator, but he refuses to say, he says, to waste a whole bunch of time just grading robots. So are we grading robots from now on? Are we going to be, should we be grading robots? And, we're going to feel like that at least for a few years till we transition to something else. I don't know. Have you felt like you're grading, or maybe the first question is, have you felt like you've been grading robots in the past? Have you caught anyone who's used AI for their entire paper?
Well, I don't give the kind of assignments that people could use AI for their entire paper, or even for substantial subsets of their paper. So the answer is no. But do I believe that it's happening in a lot of other instruction. Yeah, I believe that. I don't have any problem believing that. I want to continue with this theme of, well, who is troubled by this, who ought to be troubled by this, and what are they doing about it? And the fact that business is amoral, that's been true forever. So I may wring my hands about the fact that business is amoral and hypocritical and all these other things, but people say, well, what did you expect? So government, right, is supposed to regulate, and nothing like this could happen in the medical and healthcare industry. If you threw out minimal viable products that could in fact do damage and that were based on a whole set of false claims, it might take a little while, but it would catch up to you. And we see people go to prison for stuff like that. And we see, federal agencies that take things like this seriously and that actually have some teeth. If you look at the major contribution technologically of the US Department of Education in the last few years, it's to so screw up the FAFSA that it has devastated the higher education market. And not even apologize for it, not even fire the people that created the mess. So far from dealing with the kinds of things that we're talking about in this program, the group that should be providing some guidance and some regulation is itself wildly incompetent about technology. And what kind of a message does that send too? So it's hard to know where to turn, I guess, is what I'm saying. The organizations that should be doing something about this are not, for one reason or another. And it's hard to know how it's going to be turned around.
Maybe this is an appropriate time for us to each offer one or two organizations that we look to and trust as advice for young people, early career people in the field, for places that they might seek out and join and become a member of. Do either of you have any such organizations or institutions or communities or whatever that you could name?
Well, in my talks about AI, which are balanced, I don't talk about this stuff when I've only got an hour. I talk about the promise of AI and the overstatements about AI. Teach AI, all one word, is a coalition that I think has worked very hard to have a balanced view of AI and to put forward frameworks and policies and examples that are reputable. And so I think that's a good place to go and become involved. These national AI institutes have a couple advantages. Number one, they actually have people working for them who understand AI and who have been working in the field for a long time and who are researchers. Three things that are not characteristic of most of the authors of articles about AI that I read. And the institutes are not businesses. They're not trying to sell anything. They're trying to develop tools of different kinds that will be maybe freemium, but certainly not released to try to make money. They're not making false claims about them. They'd be defunded in a heartbeat by the National Science Foundation if they did. So there's one branch of government that's at least taking care of business. So those are two things that I would look to if you want to see where AI can be used well, and if you want to see how AI can be handled well.
So if we have beat the AI drum for a little bit, I'm looking at the time. I would like to change the conversation a little bit, but if there are any final thoughts, because we could go on and on about AI, you know what I mean? I mean, that's going to be a part of the discussion going forward. And I think we should look at getting some interesting people on the show, you know, I mean, who are working in this space and you know, and it would be fun. But
Punya, I'll just add in there that we had Sheila Jaganathan from the World Bank on a prior episode, and she named a number of resources the World Bank is providing, and very reputable ones as well. So that's the one that comes to mind before we move on.
Okay. Is either of you going to be at ISTE in a couple of weeks? All right. Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see how much AI hype is there at ISTE, because that's one of those places which has increasingly, I think, become a little bit marketing oriented, and so it'll be interesting to see that. So we'll see.
Where's ISTE gonna be again?
Denver.
Denver.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be in Atlanta, Chris, as a part of the external evaluation for the center. And then I'm going to Denver directly from there rather than come back to Phoenix and for half a day. And then, you know, so I'm sorry, I don't think you'll be there, right?
Oh, no, I'll be there.
Are you going to be there? Oh,
yeah,
cool. Awesome.
I'm part of the group that you're evaluating. I'm
No,
going to
I
be
know. I
there.
wasn't sure if you were going to be at Atlanta. For some reason, I thought that you were going to be joining by Zoom or something.
No. I'll be physically in Atlanta, and I want to
awesome.
congratulate you, because you may be the only person who comes to that meeting who thinks Atlanta is cool, because you're coming from Phoenix.
For sure.
You're going to be wearing a sweater when everybody else is dying from the heat.
No, but yes, you're right. You're right. Because we are hitting 108.10. I'm up at 5 a.m. walking this guy. And so anyway, to make it a little bit of a transition, you know, because I was just looking at the episodes that we had before, after our last host reflect. So we had the champions of robotics, which are these kids who were doing this interesting stuff with robotics. Then we had the social emotional skills in Chilean classrooms. And then we had what I think is one of my, there are some of the episodes which really stand out for me, was the girls in Afghanistan one. And I think that those three episodes, in some ways, at least the last two of those, and then of course we had the one on Minecraft, I'm forgetting that one, but the last two, the Chilean one and the one with the online learning of girls in Afghanistan, really to me act as a really nice counterbalance to all this other rhetoric that's happening. These are people who are dealing with, I mean, just listening to our guests about some of the challenges of the schools in Chile. Of course, we all know the challenges of schooling in Afghanistan right now, particularly for girls and women. And I think I said this in the episode but there are these episodes that we have when we have guests, and particularly when we have kids and people who are really passionate and committed to the work that they do in some very, very difficult circumstances, that I just come out like incredibly inspired by the level of dedication, commitment, attention to detail to individuals. So there is this sort of hope to scale, but at the same time, it never loses sight of the core value of what learning is and how liberatory learning and education can be. It takes me back to my childhood in India, where, you know, I used to take a bus and go for an hour to the Delhi Public Library to get, you know, 5 books that they would let me check out, and how amazing that was, and how much, in some ways, with this instant availability of information, we have lost that sort of sense of wonder and meaning that learning and education can provide. And I think one of the things that our show does every once in a while, I'm not saying that we do it every episode, but every once in a while, is bring home to us the deep meaning that education and learning can have to transform individual lives and you know, both, you know, and the kind of work and dedication that people bring to this task. So, you know, I think very often in this hype, we forget that. And I'm guilty of that as well, maybe more than anybody else. But those last two episodes, you know, I think the Afghanistan in particular really struck a chord with me. And I think is a really, like I said, earlier, is a great counterbalance to some of the rhetoric that one hears, because this is people working with people, helping people grow and learn and develop. And the young woman from Afghanistan, I mean, how inspiring to listen to her, and the fact that she is now teaching others. I mean, it's just an amazing thing, and I just want to sort of underscore or underline that as being incredibly powerful.
We also had the digitally operated one-room schoolhouses before, in the prior reflection, actually.
Yes,
We've had, and a couple of things come to mind. Those are such excellent shows that, should we have follow-up shows or addendum shows or, part two every once in a while for those shows that are really impactful in terms of thinking, just go by so fast in an hour? Should we think about inviting some people a year later for refund? We are doing that with our anniversary shows, of course, but in addition to that, we had the National Ed Tech Plan Part 1 and 2, and that worked out pretty well. We had two people from the plan each week, and each talked about different things that wouldn't have come up if we hadn't had two shows. But especially with the Afghan show and the Afghani women that we had living in Bangladesh 2 years ago. What's that?
That was brilliant.
Yeah. I had thought about, the Nepali kids 3 years later and find out where they're at today. How did the content, make an impact in their college career decisions and so forth. That's a possible follow-up show. Given the thrust and the momentum that we get from these past couple of weeks, how can we build on that in different ways? So, Chris, those are your contacts. If you've got any ideas there, I'd encourage, you to get possibly a follow-up to that.
I think the idea of looking back and waiting at least a year, but we've got now 4 years worth of shows, and having people back to talk about where some of the really impressive things are now, I think would be great. I know that personally, I feel a sense of hope after many episodes of Silver Lining for Learning, which I don't necessarily feel going to a research conference or picking up a scholarly journal or, going to ISTE or whatever. I do feel a sense of hope by a lot of the things that we've done in Silver Lining for Learning, which are not us. We're just publicizing them. It's the people themselves that are doing this really virtuous and important work. And I'm a researcher. I'm at a Research One university. All of my work in the field has been, research based. So I don't want to diss research, but so many of the episodes that we've been most impressed by, those programs would never have happened if they'd been research projects. Between the IRB and, having to do quasi-experimental experiments, and then if they wanted to get on the What Works Clearinghouse podcast, they'd have to do a randomized clinical trial. It would have collapsed under its own weight. And I have to say at this point that I'm glad that I'm nearing the end of my career as a scholar, because the burden now, that's the overhead that's involved in doing research, particularly with the IRB, is unbelievable. And it's a miracle that anybody does any research. And when they do research, they end up studying something that is actually far less impactful than a lot of these programs that we celebrate that are not research-based. But you don't have to do research to understand on a common sense level that people are benefiting enormously from this work. You don't have to do a randomized clinical trial to say that getting some education from a reputable source is better than getting nothing at all. I mean, come on. You don't have to have an IRB about that. You don't have to develop some proof about that. And the research field, I think, has fallen down into this black hole of methodology and of avoiding type 1 errors, to the point that there are massive type 2 errors taking place in terms of whether or not people can do anything meaningful in a research project.
We are a conduit for dozens and dozens of impactful projects, and that's a good thing. And that's what we've been able to accomplish over the past 4+ years in here, just to be a conduit, just to be a connection point, just to be a talking point, a conversational item, something to reflect on when one goes running this summer or whenever, something that people can have to discuss in their class forums, like my classes have done. We reflect on different episodes in several of my classes, not just one. And students really enjoy them. And I have alternative optional assignments around listening to or watching several episodes and making sense of them thematically. As you know, I had a couple of people early on who tried to create themes for our episodes the first year. It'd be interesting to have them do that again now after 4.5 years almost of shows. Punya.
I just want to build on something that Chris was sort of alluding to, and I just want to extend that, which is this concern with the models of research that we have created. And I think in parallel to that, part of the problem is this models of disseminating the research that we have created. So one of my colleagues, a former student of mine who's at New Mexico State, Melissa Warr, has been doing some amazing studies looking at bias within these generative AI systems. And it has been fascinating to watch how journals are dealing with it. Many of them are like almost like la 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 la. I don't want to hear or think about it because it is sort of undermining certain basic things, or the time frame within which these sort of reviews get done and things get published. By then, the technology has moved quite dramatically. So there's this twofold challenge that we are seeing here that she has been sort of confronting, doing some really phenomenal and fascinating work, which I think really should inform how we think about AI and all these tools and so on. But it's been interesting to watch the challenges that she has faced in the standard sort of academic publishing industry that we have formed. So that's the other, I think, issue there is certain kinds of methods or research techniques or topics get valued more than the others, and those lead to sort of blind spots in the field.
I agree with you completely, Punya. And again, for our audience, all three of us are AERA fellows. It's not like we are unsuccessful researchers who now are going to complain about the standards within the field. We're at the top of the totem pole in terms of our research outcomes. But my sense is, if I really want to influence the field, I'm better off writing 5 blog posts than I am creating one article in a high impact scholarly journal that, as you say, Punya, will go through several years of reviews before being published, and then maybe 100 people will read it. So yeah. So it somehow the field has to have a better balance. Because if we're not going to complain about the things that we've spent most of this episode talking about, which is the level of unfounded claims that are made by companies that are just kind of ignored, or as you say, buried by the field because they don't want to make powerful enemies, then why should we agonize over the kind of inappropriate standards that the research field has? 0.05, I've written about this. 0.05, so no more than 1 chance in 20 that a finding is due to chance. I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, in the real world, if you get a 0.3 as the basis of making decisions, you're doing pretty well. So by creating this kind of high bar and making the entire research field centered on it, we're avoiding the opportunity to have a much more significant influence with scholarly insights that don't reach that level, but that are not claimed to be truth, but that are nonetheless useful.
I had a colleague write to me this morning, and she says, journal rejected me, but they offered this option. I think I'm going to take it. A young children journal, prominent, probably top tier journal, rejected her, but they offered her a chance to publish a little bit shortened version in their blog, which will be open access, will be available to anyone who wants it, be read 50 times more than the journal article would ever be discussed. It won't be necessarily in her annual productivity report. It'll be there somewhere, but it'll be much more impactful for her as a scholar, and she'll get more sense of self-worth and identity, actually. So, the outlets, the dissemination outlets that we have in front of us that we choose are extremely important for the young people out there. Mix it up a little bit, take a chance in writing a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education. It might be more widely read or Inside Higher Ed or somewhere else, The Conversation or The Evolution, which are open access pieces. And my friend Kyung-Mi Lee in Korea, she wrote a couple of pieces for the Conversation in Australia during the beginning of COVID. They were read by tens of thousands of people, and she's a young person in the field, and she's gotten well known just from writing these couple little short pieces on how teachers can better make their learning more engaging and so forth. So we have to think about finding those outlets, and podcast shows are one such outlet for people that wouldn't have had that chance, that opportunity to share their work, to share their findings or their passions with the rest of the world. And that's what we've provided. That's what they've provided. And that's what we'll continue to provide in the coming weeks and months ahead, with some really exciting and interesting shows coming up. We're just about out of time. I'm going to introduce, I guess, the next show, because I guess I'm going to be handling that one. But you guys each want to make a final comment before we go to the next show?
Well, every once in a while, we do a host reflect where it's essentially three old guys complaining. And I think that's a useful thing, actually. I wouldn't want every show to be like that. And I think now we can have a series of episodes about great work other people are doing, where we're very positive and very cheerful and very happy about what they're up to. So thanks for letting us vent. And I hope that you find at least some of what we said of concern.
Yeah, which is part of the reason, Chris, why I sort of wanted to circle us back to some of our sort of recent past episodes, which provide a very different picture, much more hopeful and positive picture. So that was part of the reason for doing that, because one can go on and vent, and there is so much value in that, and that's important sometimes to do that as sort of a course correction where we feel that things are not going the right direction. But it's always good to also have the positive stories. And so we will get a few coming up. Curt.
This has been a great show today. It's lovely here in Indiana today. Hopefully it'll cool down for you, Punya. I'll be out in Vegas in a couple weeks in the Heat Dome. We're going to be moving to episode 197 next week. The future of e-learning in a post-COVID Africa.
Not next week, 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, sorry. 2 weeks from now, because next week we're going to go on a little hiatus. So we'll see you at noon in 2 weeks on June 29th. It's actually at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time, because we're going to have folks from Africa who are coming at night there. So I'll see you all then. We'll see you all then.